All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Waldhorn. I am the Chief Operating Officer of the Sports Innovation Lab, and welcome to another edition of our Ask Me Anything series. We launched this series just a few days after sports were officially canceled and really the world was set into lockdown. And we did so in an effort to inspire and motivate towards action during a time when the thought of pushing forward and innovating and making change could feel especially daunting. So we use this AMA series to bring thought leaders and trailblazers from within the industry, from outside the industry. We've hosted guests from NBA champion Paul Gasol to the commissioner of the A10 conference, to the founder of the Drone Racing League, to really have an open and honest conversation about the state of the industry today and what preparing for tomorrow looks like. And today we are very excited to have two guests with us who are really on the forefront of what it's going to look like to get fans back into stadiums. So we're super thrilled to kick off this conversation with Julie Johnson Roberts, the CEO and co-founder of Armored Things, and Ed O'Brien, GM of Sports for Clear. But before we do that, this is an Ask Me Anything, which means we want your involvement. So I'm going to go ahead and explain how you can participate in today's session. First, please take note that you're on mute. You should be on mute. Please stay on mute. We also may turn off some cameras just to make sure that everything is focused, because this session is being recorded. So for anyone who misses it, needs to leave early, we'll go ahead and follow up with a recording of this session after we complete today. And if you have more questions and we don't get to your question, or you're really enjoying the conversation, you can continue to talk to our guests today, our past guests, our team members at the Sports Innovation Lab, and other participants on our open Slack community. So you can see right there, bit.ly, join Slack SIL, open community. We've got over 500 members from the sports community on there daily, pushing conversation forward. So please join us there. If you would like to participate and contribute a question today, you can do so by opening up the chat window in your Zoom. So down at the bottom, if you're not familiar, a little icon there that's circled, it's going to extend a window. You can select to post your question to either everyone, where it'll be posted publicly for all participants to view, or you can send a question directly to the hosts, myself and Josh Walker, and that will be displayed to us privately for us to ask our guests your questions. And if it is publicly, you'll see it pop up right there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's guest. Hosting us is Josh Walker, the co-founder and president of the Sports Innovation Lab. And Josh Walker is a thought leader and visionary who continues to push for innovation and transformation of the fan experience. Josh leads the Sports Innovation Lab's roster of over 60 clients across the industry on preparing their business for the fan of the future, something we call the fluid fan. He was formerly VP of Research at Forrester, and here at the lab, he stewards our groundbreaking research on the future of the venue, on athlete-driven media, on what a new age of sports really looks like. And he also leads the lab's technology development, so all of the analysis and our tool that is available for everyone to use at app.sportsilab.com is Josh's baby. Josh also stewards our Executive Leadership Board program, which, like this AMA series, brings together the most forward-thinking executives from across the sports industry to push for change and innovation. So Josh, thanks for hosting this. And our guest today, first is Julie Johnson Roberts, the Armored Things CEO and co-founder. Armored Things is an early-stage crowd intelligence company that uses AI to transform physical security operations for large venues and campuses. Armored Things' mission is to keep people safe where they work, live, and play. Since the beginning of the COVID crisis, Armored Things has been exploring tools to help with reopening and response, building on their existing crowd intelligence assets to include efforts like crowd limit monitoring and thermal camera alert integration. Julie co-founded Armored Things after working at Qualcomm, where she was focused on cybersecurity for the Internet of Things for both the corporate venture capital arm as well as a strategic liaison for the Bay Area research and development team. Previously, Julie held positions across trading, investment, management, and venture capital. And Julie, your expertise and your company could not be more valuable than today. So we're thrilled to have you join us today. And with Julie is Ed O'Brien, GM of Sports for Clear. Ed currently serves as the GM for Clear, which is a secure biometric platform. Ed's main focus is leveraging identity to build touchless venue experiences with leagues, teams, and colleges. Clear has brought the first of its kind experience across touchless ticketing and transactions, which is age validation and payment, to the sports industry. Prior to Clear, Ed worked at MLB, AM, and Neulion. So Ed, a true expert in this space. Julie and Josh, we are thrilled to have you guys kick off this very timely and important conversation today. So I will hand it over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you guys all for joining today. As Gina mentioned, we've been doing this for a number of weeks, and what has been very clear to me is that we are moving into that next phase. What I said to my team was, you know, when this thing started, we needed to go out and get smart about a lot of things that we weren't really familiar with. We are very hungry for knowledge. We always look at data and think about what the venue should employ as new technology. But none of us were prepared to talk about thermal cameras, contact tracing, and all the other language you're going to hear today, because it really wasn't on our radar. And so if you hear these terms, it's completely natural and really understandable that you wouldn't understand what these technologies do. So we're going to try to unpack a little bit of that so you have some of this familiarity. And the time is now to do this. Which is why we asked Julie and Ed to join us today, because we're really turning that page. We're going from all of the, you know, knee-jerk jolt of the industry shutting down to now thinking about when should we bring fans back in the stadium. So before we get started, what I want to do is I want to really just kind of take everybody's temperature on this call and give you guys a quick chance to weigh in on what you think is appropriate for the industry to be doing right now. Is it the right time to start planning for fans back in the venues? Is it too early? Should we start planning now? Or are a lot of you really surprised that there were no plans in place for something of this magnitude? So while you're weighing in, I will tell you that I am 100% biased on this answer, because we have been listening to all of the leagues, teams, federations calling us saying they need to have contingency plans. They're not in control of these decisions. A lot of governments are going to make these decisions for them because there's a lot of economic drivers to open stadiums back up. There's a lot of political drivers to open stadiums back up. And what the Sports Innovation Lab believes very strongly is that that has to be done the right way. So with that, I'm going to end the polling, share the results with you guys, and let you start asking Julie and Ed anything, which is kind of the whole reason we're here. So start using that chat window and get going. But before I let you guys all weigh in, if you've been on other AMAs, you'll know that I do my questions first because I'm selfish. And what I'd like to do is really just first share these results and then let Julie and Ed weigh in on my first question. Is it the right time to start planning for fans back in venues? 10% of you said no, it's too early. 86% of you feel like this is exactly the right time. And 6% of you said we've waited too long and we should have had plans in place. So with that, let me ask the big open question to you, Julie, to kick off. What are you hearing from your customers? What do you think we should be doing right now? And what is your company doing to prepare your clients for this opportunity?
Yeah, great. So, you know, our customers are probably represented by many of the folks on the line here, which is spanning the role of the venue, spanning the role of the service provider to the venues, working with people in more traditional environments as well, you know, corporate enterprise environments. I would say the most common theme is that everyone is trying to figure out the return to normalcy, right? So the first phase of that is the when. So when are we going to get that formal permission that you talked about to reopen? But then the second piece of that is how do we actually ensure that we feel ready to reopen when we do get that formal permission? And then the third piece is how do we know that when we do reopen with our practices and procedures in place, that our fans are willing to come back and that we go back to some version of business as usual. So the way that we talk to our customers about that, is talking to them a little bit about how the reopening might look like as phase one, and then expanding from there. So there's a number of questions that I would be asking myself if I'm the venue beyond just what is my plan. It's really, what do I need to know, and what do I need to be able to help my fans know in order for them to feel comfortable returning? I need to know where I have high traffic zones. I need to know that I have good cleaning and sanitation practices in place. I need to know that I can minimize exposure of some of my workers on site before I reopen to the general public. I need to know that I have a policy for contact tracing, whether that's manual or technological. There's just the sequence of questions that I need to go through before I can really say I'm ready to reopen. And then the question becomes, which one of these do I prioritize, especially now when my venue is partially shut down or potentially with very limited access for people to get to.
Ed, same question to you. You guys are very well known for being at the airports, managing access control. A lot of that is touchless security. A lot of the innovation you've done as a product company has been around touchless age verification and other things that are going to help with the payments and other services that need to be in the venue. What are you hearing from your clients and your partners right now?
Yeah, so a lot of the things we're talking to our partners about are similar to what Julie mentioned, but we're looking at, like you said, many verticals, right? Obviously, the airport, travel space in general. We're looking at talking to the sports space. We're speaking to people in office buildings, hotel industries, right? And trying to gather all this feedback across it, because there's going to be a lot of parallels and then some differences between each vertical. And as we look to be a enabler and a helper for all these components coming back on, we want to make sure that we're building something that helps the larger economy, and then being able to tailor it for these specific spots, these specific verticals. And so, I think one of the big themes has been both in the planning stage and then also when you actually get to the execution stage, is having options, right? Because everything is so fluid right now. And what may be okay for New York isn't going to be for Seattle when everything starts to come back online, right? And so in having options in terms of how do you reopen, and then in terms of the specific offerings that you put out to fans and employees, honestly, so we're having a lot of talks around the employee side, because that's probably going to be what comes back first in some form. How do these options allow people to make choices in how they return to the venue? And so as Julie was mentioning, there's a lot of data out there around when fans think venues will reopen and then when they'll feel comfortable coming back. And if people don't provide options and are too limited in their focus, it's just going to really make that window even longer for when people feel comfortable returning. And so I think there's a lot of educated guesses and a lot of research being done around what people or fans will want in order to return. But ultimately, it's going to be having to listen, provide options, and then being able to, look at the data quickly when you do reopen to figure out what's actually meaningful, beneficial, and impactful to the fans.
So let me frame sort of the Sports Innovation Lab's research on this topic, so it gets some of the people on this call thinking about the questions they should be asking. One is, we have a client-only meeting next week where we're going to go through a lot of this recommendation stuff in detail. And in that meeting, we are actually recommending that our clients develop a special task force for crowd safety. And the first thing to acknowledge is that this is not some side project where you just tap a few interns and you try to go out and get smart about temperature guns. There's a lot of really important things that Julie and Ed just mentioned that we can't glaze over, that there are going to be different scenarios that you have to plan for that require different approaches. And the first scenario is that you're probably going to be in a situation where you're doing critical personnel only and media production staff and your athletes in this environment. And you can't tie their safety and their security to a ticket because they don't have one. So a lot of the things that we're talking about with seat tickets and contact tracing and following the fans around the venue doesn't really apply in that first phase. That second phase is where we can start talking about distancing the fans and seating arrangements. We can start using a lot of analog solutions that don't require technology, like the sanitation that Julie mentioned. There's going to be a lot of that makes sure that you're advocating for the fans. And there's a term that people use now called security theater. And security theater could be the opportunity to actually use these thermal cameras and these temperature guns to let people feel like the people that are entering the venue have been vetted in a more thorough way. But a lot of critics would immediately jump to the point that that's only measuring their temperature on their skin level, and it's not doing their thermal, and it's not diagnosing an asymptomatic person at all. So get smart about this stuff. We've been reading, mind-numbingly boring, WHO and CDC papers to get smart about how they're approaching this and what their recommendations are around crowd thresholds. And then you can start asking, Julie, like, when is a crowd too big? What are you hearing? When is it too dense? How does your technology help us figure out when that threshold has been crossed? And you can then ask Ed, okay, when should we create another line so that we can move people through an access control area where we might have an isolation room in case somebody does trip a temperature gun and needs to be put into a medical situation? Those are the things that are really going to help people feel safer as we get into that second and third phase of bringing fans back. So I hope that gives you guys at least some context for what a task force would be required to think through. Julie, on those topics alone, right? When does your technology seem to make the most sense? Is it before the fans enter the venue? Is it during the game? Is it after to make sure that they exit safely? Is it all of the above?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who don't know Armored Things, we call ourselves a crowd intelligence platform, but what we're really dealing with is patterns of people and flow. So we know at a 35,000 foot level, how many people are in a venue or corporate campus or university campus, all the way down to something much more granular. We do that by tapping into kind of the existing infrastructure like cameras and Wi-Fi on an anonymous basis to map out these trends. Obviously, once you know where people are in real time, in the new COVID world, that also enables you to do some really interesting things about capacity management and overcrowding. So something that's actually already in our product today, pre-COVID, but has taken on a total new meaning, is around threshold alerting. When do we know that the number of people in a specific area is exceeding what we deem to be safe? Previously, we were talking about life safety, fire safety, those types of limits, but we're living in a world where we're going to need to think dynamically. So Josh, to your question, that might mean that when we return to our venue, we're expecting critical staff only, less than 10% of capacity. In 3 months, maybe it's 25%, 6 months, maybe it's 50%, and so on and so forth. How do we make sure that our technology can be adaptable to the needs of our customers? Because to your point, every city is going to be different. Every team is going to be different. Management, leadership is going to have different views on this. So what we want to do is equip them with the data to validate what they're saying they need and give them an ability to take action in real time. I think going to how that ties into getting folks back into the venue, to your earlier point, visible measures like temperature scanning might be just that, right? It might be like security theater, something that looks good to my fans and helps build confidence that I am taking a proactive strategy. But I think to the introductory comments from Ed and myself, saying that you have a plan and being able to show your plan in action is actually critically important with building confidence and getting people to return. I put out a piece this morning on LinkedIn about the fact that trust actually needs to be bi-directional. So if I'm the fan, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from your team to say, what are you doing to keep me safe? But you as the venue should also be expecting me to make good decisions, to not come with a group of 20 of my friends, crowd into the same 2 rows. And how do we make sure that that happens?
Yeah, we've talked about this before this call, so I've been previewed to this thinking, and I love the way you describe it, because if I'm going to make you comfortable as a venue, I need to do certain things that make it feel different when I arrive at that venue. If I feel like it's just the same old game and you haven't really taken any precautions or anything, I'm just probably going to turn around and head out, because it doesn't feel like that's the right scenario, right? And that's just my personal perspective, but I think that that's where a lot of these new instrumentations come into play, because it gives you that sense that, oh, the venue is taking this very seriously. And then I love how you say, well, that's also the fans' responsibility. You don't go to the venue if you have a temperature. You don't go to the venue if you feel like you're a threat to other people. And there has to be that bi-directional trust. And I love the way that you describe that. And I think that that has to be baked into some sort of, processes as we roll things back out. Ed, when people think about the way that CLEAR works, I can picture you guys in the airports where you walk through the security. What are you guys going to be doing beyond that access control point to work with your partners to ensure that people are safer? And then we've got a bunch of questions, so you guys are just going to have to shoot from the hip because they're going to come at you from different directions.
That's good. One thing to add just to the previous question, I think when employees coming back into the venues before fans, I actually think is an opportunity for whatever protocols are put in place to test it on a much smaller, more controllable, subset of folks before you start to open it up to fans. So it's going to give venue operators, leagues, teams the opportunity to kind of test out some of these policies, again, on a much smaller, controllable base before you get to the fan component. And the other thing I'd say is there's all of this, obviously there's some issues with, like, say, temperature checks. No, nothing's a silver bullet. And so there's going to be a layered approach here. And it's not dissimilar to how you think about security at a venue where there's multiple steps that need to be put in place and there's not that one silver bullet. So just, one thing to add to the previous question. In terms of what Clear's looking at, so yeah, a lot of people are probably familiar with us from the airport or even our sports venues and predominantly around access. We've made a big change, this was even before COVID, towards the touchless technology piece, right? So historically, you would need, if you wanted to enroll in Clear, it's an opt-in platform, but if you wanted to enroll, you needed to go and do it in person, whether it was at Yankee Stadium or at JFK. And now you actually are going to be able to do that on your phone, on your own time, right? And so from a scalability standpoint, there's a lot of benefits there. But in today's day and age of post-COVID, it's also a touchless enrollment, right? So I don't need to go speak to a Clear employee. I don't have to put my fingers on a pod that someone had used before. It's all done on your own device, leveraging facial recognition. So that's something we had rolled out before this anyways, but now we're going to be even leaning into it heavier. And then when you actually get to the venues, whether it be sports, airport, other, working to make everything touchless. So in the airport, we're actually able to pivot pretty quickly because we already offered iris scans for the last 10 years. And so made that the predominant biometric in airports today versus finger. On the sports side, we're going towards facial recognition. So that mobile enrollment will now enable you to do touchless ticketing, which we had done out at Citi Field towards the end of last year. You can actually walk up, verify your Clear account with your face, as well as link your ticket. So I don't have to pull out a ticket or have a ticket scanned by an individual. And then once you get inside the venue, moving towards age validation and payment around concessions. And that was predominantly or previously done with fingerprint. And again, now moving towards face. And again, when you think about it in this post-COVID world, not only is it faster because now it's taking two steps, combining it into one of age validation and payment, but it's also negating the need to hand my ID over to a concession worker who has to check it to make sure it's real, check that I'm 21, but also just touch my ID and then hand it back. And so from a sanitary perspective, we're now moving toward this touchless age validation as well.
Let me ask the dumb question. What about when fans are showing up with masks on their face?
We're working through all those. So this has been a big topic the last week or so internally. So the last 6 weeks we've been out having discussions, amongst all our partners as well as others, and trying to collect all the necessary data to make the product that's going to be useful for the environment, right? And so now we're getting into that level of detail.
So a number of these questions I'll try to condense into one that's really about a recommendation we're trying to work through with our clients around communication. Before COVID, a lot of people have had resistance to downloading venue apps. The benefits of downloading the venue app was, your ticket might have been on there. You could get a loyalty program. You could play some games, something like that. Is it fair to expect the venues now to mandate that any fan that's going to come post-COVID have a mobile app that's an official app of the venue so that they can provide updates on threshold monitoring or alert a fan if there's an issue that they need to be aware of? Julie, you want to take that first?
I'll let Ed kick that one off.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So I don't know if I don't want to speak for any of the venues or the leagues, and I don't believe any decisions have been made on that, but I don't think it's unreasonable to make that move more towards that, right? Because this is obviously this is a much different world than we were dealing with 2 months ago. And it's all in the vein of public safety and health, which is obviously paramount to when and how these venues reopen. And to Julie's point of the fans need to play a role in that. And if that's, something that maybe wasn't a requirement before, but now seems to be honestly a pretty low barrier requirement, I could see there's definitely that's consideration. Whether it happens or not, we'll see. But there are going to be changes, and there are going to be the fans are going to have to change some of their expectations. And, I think a vast majority from everything you read will probably accept that. There's going to be some that won't and have to push back. But it's about having those options. And if it's done in the vein of health and safety, and coming back online in the appropriate manner, because I think the worst thing you can do in this situation is come back too soon or in the wrong way and have, a potential issue arise, which, obviously happened over in, I believe it was Hong Kong or Japan. That would set the industry back even further. And so fans will certainly play a part in that, and teams asking them to do something like that is, probably feels appropriate during this time.
Yeah, I think where I come out to is why, and again, how is it communicated? So as a team, we have an internal communications policy, right? What are we saying to our employees? What are we saying to our players? What are we saying now externally as well? And so if I'm now communicating externally that I want every single fan coming into my venue to use my app, why? We're trying to minimize touch with contactless ticketing and payments, those kinds of things. Contact tracing. If I know some way to contact each individual who's come into my venue, or at least the lead ticket holder of a group, a parent or someone getting tickets for their immediate family, now I have a means for communicating with them that I might not have otherwise had. How do we make sure that we don't lose their trust in that process? I think that the balance of what we're communicating to them for safety versus what we're communicating to them for marketing needs to be a careful balance, right? If we overly then start pushing them coupons when they're not at our venue and saying, hey, come back for another game, maybe that starts to run the line of looking like we're taking advantage of the adoption of that technology. But if it's done well, ideally, then those individuals continue to use that mobile app well beyond, the near-term scrutiny on public health and safety. But certainly it's a double-edged sword in some ways, right? You can certainly use these same methods to track people, see how often they come back. And so again, communicating the why, I think is critical.
Yeah, and I think, look, I didn't know what contact tracing was, 6 weeks ago. And now I've been on a number of webinars, calls, and even spoken to some health officials about how they're employing this. And there's a group in MIT that I shared with you guys, the COVID Safe Paths. And Google and Apple are opening up APIs to their operating systems. And COVID Safe Paths and other initiatives like that are trying to do a privacy-based way of, tracking where you are because you opt in to allow the phone to create a log of where you are. And then if you want to match your own personal log, it gets uploaded in an encrypted way to figure out where you've overlapped with potential people that could have put you at risk. That's the essential nutshell of, contact tracing. If we don't have people on a mobile app, and if we're not messaging to them within the venue, I don't see how that works in a situation where we're bringing fans back. A lot of people say, well, you just, you can keep an eye on their ticket. And if the ticket number is verified and we know that they sat in that section, then we can really triage anything that would have happened in that general area. I'm interested in your perspective on how far along you think people are in exploring that as an option, meaning that the technology versus the analog approach to spacing out, seats and tickets and just closing the lower bowl versus the up, whatever it is. Where are your clients and partners in the scheme of planning that kind of approach to seating and spacing? Julie, want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So, we're having a lot of conversations about contact tracing, and that's both a technology-based solution and a more manual solution. So Armored Things is working with a partner of ours that's doing, think of it as Bluetooth sensing. If my phone detects your phone, how do we keep a log of which phones were in the nearby area? I think that's much easier to mandate for your employees or people you directly control. And I think there's a number of different approaches like the MIT one that you could potentially deploy. The question is going to be, is one the dominant standard? Because if not, it's only as useful as the number of people who have deployed it, and it's heavily reliant on self-reporting. So no matter which tool you use, it ultimately comes back to, did someone who tested positive actually report into the tool that they tested positive, and does that start the chain reaction of notification that's intended. I think on the more manual side of things, going back to your question about fan apps and can we communicate with our fans more, we've been talking about, again, those thresholds and capacity limits. Is there a version of that I can actually expose to my fans? Can I give that data in real time to the venue so that they can give in their fan app a green, yellow, red at certain gates, or a green, yellow, red at certain bathrooms or beer stands? How do we help people make good decisions? Hopefully so that they're not ending up, in an area with 100 fans packed in. Instead, they're kind of taking the steps to prevent that close contact, following the other guidelines around distancing and mitigation.
Ed, same
Yeah,
question.
I mean, I think I think all of this is going to be a phased approach, when starting with employees, moving to fans, and as you go to fans, whether that's in a very limited capacity to start, like 10% or even 25%, everything's going to be phased, and all the processes and policies around that are going to be phased. I believe from all the discussions we've been having is that people will probably start with some of the components that are a little more the general public's used to, like around social distancing and those types of components, versus moving right to contact tracing. I think that's something that you'll see probably potentially be woven in over time as everybody gets more comfortable with coming back and what is required to come back. But I think if you're looking at just thinking about it like from a psychological standpoint of getting people back in a safe manner, you're going to start with some of the things that they're already more used to that's out in the space. And then you get into some of the other components that are honestly, from a data perspective, a lot more solid in terms of providing the true positive, notion that everybody's healthy around you. But I think it's going to start with things that make people feel more safe, and it's just going to be a phased-in approach.
Well, there's so many good questions here. I'll ask Lisa Johnson's really quickly, and then hopefully get to Josh's right away. A lot of this is about privacy and the sense that, I'm giving something up in return for something else. The whole industry has balked at a number of things like facial recognition, which Lisa mentions. Do you think this changes just the appetite for venue operators and leagues and, health officials, medical officials to push and mandate some of this stuff? Is it just, the obvious answer is yes, but like how much do you think this is going to be a long-term change versus just a knee-jerk, short term?
I'll speak to it from the clear point of view. It doesn't really change from our point of view. It doesn't change anything that we've done for the last 10 years. We're an opt-in platform, and we'll continue to be an opt-in platform. And so if it's something that you didn't want to be as a fan or an employee didn't want to be part of, then obviously you don't have to, right? And so that's a promise we will keep to the end for all of our members, right? I think the way in which you can drive adoption based off of that is how do you piece together these experiences, right? And so if you just think about some of the things that are being discussed out in the space, and just take something pretty simple like temperature checks, right? So if a fan has to take a temperature to walk into a venue, that's an additional step that they didn't have to do 2 months ago, right? And if there's a way to combine those and make it easier, right, for them to be able to do that, that's the way you can drive adoptions, through providing these positive experiences for members. And so when we think about whatever the opportunities are to add in more components to the CLEAR system around health, there's obviously a lot of options that are out there right now, but we try to think about it and what's the best for the customer experience. And again, it's always going to be an opt-in from our perspective.
And Julie, Alex asked a question that you and I have talked about because we both are aware of what the skeptics say about the temperature guns and the thermal cameras. Basically, his question is around the idea that there might be a lot of environmental things or even just personal things that would trigger a false positive, and then you could have people being pulled off in lines, or you could have areas evacuated for false positives and things like that. How should everybody think about these new technologies being used to screen people at the gate or even beforehand?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do think that there's a lot of thought that diverges in this area. I think a lot of people initially thought maybe temperature scanners would be the one size fits all solution. And then over time, as people read more and more about these solutions, they realize that there are kind of externalities to the system. The outside temperature, was I sitting in an air-conditioned car or did I take public transit? How can that impact, the reading? So if we're thinking about, our gates, where do we want to have that type of technology? Do we put it, at the gate? Do we put it 20 feet before the gate? Do we have people lined up around the block, or do we not actually want that associated with our venue either? I think this is why it all comes back to having a more comprehensive solution. No one size fits all. Even if we do body temperature scanning, that might not be the final solution that detects or prevents people from spreading this disease. But that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile for investigating and potentially deploying, especially in the early phases, again, to give confidence and potentially to detect a few people where that is kind of a critical piece of the puzzle.
So everybody in the industry agrees we need to have plans, and we need to have scenario plans, different plans for different scenarios. What I always try to get my hands wrapped around, because I'm a very visual person, is what do these plans look like? Are they blueprints, of the building? Are they floor plans? Are they architectural schematics that show crowd flow? What are we actually talking about when we say to a venue or to a facility manager, like, you need to have plans for this and we want to see it? It certainly doesn't look like the CDC's documents, which, like, again, they'll make your eyes fall out because they're so dense, but also, like, they're not specific, right? So you can take those recommendations and you can go in a million different directions. I think what people need is real detail and real specificity around what they should be doing at different access points, what they should be doing with concessions, what they should be doing with hygiene and cleanliness. What do you think this end product looks like when we have 2 or 3 scenario plans? Is it PowerPoint presentations? Like, is it literally a document? Have you guys seen anybody float any of this stuff past you yet?
Yeah, so I can start that one if that's all right, Ed.
Yeah.
I believe these are actually going to be more like living plans because this is a bit of a new landscape and an emerging threat, right? But if you think of the dusty 3-ring binders on the traditional physical security side, I don't think that that's where people want to go with this, nor is it where they should go with this. We need something that's constantly being improved, maintained, so on and so forth. So the way that I've been thinking about it is, first you set a plan, which is just the what. What are we going to do? Then you have to communicate that plan. So that gets to the who. Who are we speaking to? How do we talk to those people? What are the means of communication, whether that's smart signage, text messages, emails, other forms of media, education. It's a bit of the why. Why do we believe that these steps will keep you safe? Audit. Are we actually doing the things that we say that we're doing? If we're not, how do we make sure we are in future iterations? And then the last one is kind of iteration. How do we improve upon our initial plan and then run through that process again? Plan, communicate, educate, audit, iterate. It just has to be a living plan because this is a living threat.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think you need to also think through, each step of the way, what could possibly go wrong, or what else could come up, and have options to be able to pivot and move quickly should those situations arise. So if you're if you're talking about ingress and you think it could go A, B, or C, it ends up being B, how do you move forward that and then improve upon it, to your point, from an iteration? So I think that's one of the toughest challenges out there is right now, everyone kind of has their idea of how this can and will go, and maybe in 1 or 2 different scenarios, but ultimately we don't know until folks start coming back into the building. And so you can't have one linear plan. It has to have multiple options, kind of like those old choose your own adventure books, right? Like you have to go down different routes depending on how employees and fans actually react to all this, new components that are now going to be part of their venue experience.
So Christina asks, these are all nice things that we're talking about, but obviously somebody is going to have to pay for them. And we had an earlier question too, which was about government support and subsidy and bringing sport back. If the government were to step in and underwrite some of these changes, where do you think their money would be best utilized in helping, the venues get going when it comes to fans? Not really this employee, ghost game scenario, but if the government came in with a check and they said, look, we need these venues back open. We need them open safely, and we need fans to start cheering again because this is cathartic for our nation. Here's a couple bucks. Go do something like this. What would it be?
I think it's a pretty broad question, obviously, and I don't know if there's any silver bullet, but I believe it would be a private-public partnership with that money to help define what are the right requirements in the people in each city? Like, what do they need to come back online? So I don't think you could just say it's all temperature checks or all contact tracing, right? I think it's building that layered approach, and going out and listening to the people in each city or each region, because I do think it is going to differ, right? Like, different areas have been impacted differently. And so people are probably going to come back at varying rates depending on where they are. And so maybe if you need 3 layers to your plan in one area, you might need 6 layers to your plan in that other area. So I don't have a specific, piece of technology or one component that I think like that's where the money should go to, but it should be a partnership on doing the research and going out and having the right conversations, and then coming up with the layered approach to how that is done, and using the money wisely and not just throwing it out there to be used in whatever manner.
Yeah, I hate to boil it down to one word, but I think that in some ways what we're talking about here comes back to liability, right? And we actually have a framework for liability with large venues. It's called the DHS Safety Act. If I can prove that I'm minimizing my risk and liability by following a checklist of best practices for my venue, the federal government steps in and says, we will help you in the event of terrorism, right? Mitigate your risk to ownership to the franchise overall. I wouldn't be surprised to see a movement towards that kind of checklist in crowd health, or the health of fans in large venues. And I think that goes exactly to what Ed was saying, right? How do we form a working group, some kind of public-private partnership to say, what are the different components of a good strategy? And then how do we start to rank different providers of those solutions, get their technology certified for helping in this new regime, and then get it to the venues, right? Get it out there. There's funding for solutions that can make these venues safer, and then certainly downside protection in the form of liability.
Eric Lee asks the question, is the TSA a viable resource for any of this? I'm sorry, Eric, I summarized your question very succinctly, but could the TSA play a role in this in any way?
I mean, potentially, right? I mean, from a clear perspective, a lot of one of the reasons we got into sports, obviously, was we were in airports previously, and a lot of that was set up in conjunction with TSA. When we got into sports, it was because teams started calling us and saying, hey, we noticed what you were doing in the airports. How can we do something similar, but obviously amended for sports venues, right? And so I think there's manners in which they can provide guidance. I don't think they're going to set rules for venues outside of travel, right? But I think they can set guidance, or at least provide leadership in terms of how people look at it. And then maybe the second piece of that is to what Julie was saying, is that there's some other entity that could be government formed out of this, similar to Safety Act, that helps provide that guidance in a more formal way. And so I think the TSA would be more of, someone you could look to in terms of how they do that. And that's honestly why people were looking at Clear. They're basically like, hey, you guys were, approved by TSA, so to speak. So obviously you kind of have you've proved it out in the most difficult security environment. How can you bring this to venues, right? And so I think you can look at the TSA in that regard versus, I don't believe, and again, I don't work there, but I don't think they're going to be setting policy for venues.
And Julie, let me jump gears real quick so we can get to some of these other questions. Kiva and Josh both ask a similar question, which is VIP, luxury clients, season ticket holders, can they play a role in some of this early phase stuff? Do you expect the venues to open the venue to them first as a prioritized group of customers? And, as an opt-in, could they help really put in place some of these processes and plans for the rest of the fans that follow them later?
Great question. I think it'll still come down.
It is a great question. I hadn't thought about that. Like, who gets to go first, right? You're not going to open up, StubHub to start selling these tickets. It's you're going to give them.
Well, and the question really becomes, even if we prioritize our VIPs, and I think there's a big issue with that from an optics perspective potentially, and a PR perspective potentially, are we still ensuring the same safe measures? I would argue that if you're prioritizing VIP, but all of your VIP fans go to the same 4 luxury suites, you're not actually minimizing their contact, right? So whatever we prioritize, whoever we prioritize, perhaps we need to be prioritizing people who are willing to opt in, whether that's VIP or other, and then thinking about how do we make sure there's a safe, positive experience for different tiers of our fans, because I think we don't really want to leave behind, the family that's been coming for 50 years because they're not buying luxury boxes.
Well, that was Mark's point. It's like certainly one of those things that you need to be very mindful of. You could do that with the VIP suite holders and luxury box clientele, but you're going to alienate all of those other diehard fans and fluid fans that are out there. So we're coming to the end of the hour. This has been like ridiculously all over the place, but also like right on point with the questions we're getting on and on. You guys should remember that the Slack community is available. Ed and Julie are on there. Gina, can you show that again so that everybody knows where you guys can continue to ask these questions? Because as accommodating as Julie and Ed have been with their time, I don't know that we're going to get to all of these questions, and I want to keep talking about some of these issues, and folks have already said this has been too short. So let's ask a few more questions, but I want you guys to take note of the Slack community that's there, because again, my team's on there every single day answering some of these questions, and Julie and Ed's teams are there as well. So one other question does deal with ticketing too. Digital ticketing is going to be a huge part of this. Do you guys think that there's going to need to be a whole new set of rules and regulations that get, amended to those tickets, or, as addendums to purchasing a ticket that gives the venue additional indemnification? Or has all of this sort of been covered in terms of, fan rights in the past? Is this a new situation that requires new legal language that, fans need to understand when they buy these tickets, and venues need to implement to cover their asses?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some changes from all our conversations, to what degree, probably TBD, depending on what's actually instituted, but there'll be some changes. And I think you'll see that done from everything all the discussions we've had, done in a very transparent, upfront manner. To Julie's point about educating people what they're actually kind of coming back to, which is going to be different than what they left. You're going to have to be upfront about whatever changes there are.
Yeah, and I'm going to call a quick timeout again, because I want to make sure that we ask Tom's question from the BAA and the Boston Marathon. We've been talking a lot about the gate. We always do this as we talk about the venue, but there's outdoor venues. Spartan Race is one of our clients. The Boston Marathon has been talking with us about how they implement security measures and things like that. How does any of what we've just discussed change when you think about those outdoor venues, golf courses, road races, things of that nature?
Go,
That's
Julie?
really tricky. And in some ways you don't have the luxury of a gate, which I think thinking of a gate as a luxury is probably counterintuitive to some folks on here. But, if you're running the Boston Marathon, where do you check people? Do you, ask people to line up even earlier in the morning to have their temperatures taken? And is that actually realistic? What % of the people are you really going to capture if you can execute that, especially when you're ultimately running open roads? I think the advantage of the open air events, of course, is that, some of the data has been shown to say, it's much harder to, spread things in outdoor environments with circulated air, these kinds of things. But I don't know that that's going to be sufficient comfort. So I do think that at some point we will probably see an emergence of standards around asking participants to wear masks, even if it's just in starting line areas or areas where they're running alongside, many people or playing along many people. How long that goes on for, or how easy that is to actually enforce, right? I think a number of governors have said, yes, I've put a mandatory mask rule in place, but I don't have the ability to enforce it because there's millions of people and only thousands of officers. And is it a good use of their resources? I mean, these are the same questions that I think your race coordinators are going to grapple with.
All right. So Gina, can you put up the Power Play Index stuff? One of the things that we're trying to do too is give you guys some tools that you can use to make some of these decisions. We've done a ton of research on the technology providers that provide connectivity for venues and some of these outdoor, event spaces. What we've done is we've tried to focus on some of the technologies that are, really dominant in sport. So we've shared this with some of our clients, so for them it's familiar. But on the y-axis, what we look for are technology vendors that are talking about sports a lot in conjunction with the technologies that we know that matter to connect fans. So this graphic shows you very much which technology providers provide baseline connectivity services. So, Wi-Fi that can go through cement, internal DAS systems for the venue, the things that, Clear and Armored Things and everybody else is plugging into is instrumented by these companies. And while there are lots of companies out there that do these things, there are those that certainly have more experience in sports than others. So this is called our Power Play Index. It's the Sports Innovation Labs graphic to help you guys make decisions about who you should be talking to and why. So reach out, let us know if you want to. This is now on our website. You guys are more than welcome to use this. And we'll continue to launch more of these as this situation continues to unfold. There are over 190 people on here. You guys have all stayed for the entire hour. We're obviously going to need to do this again. And we will, because what's happening is each of these dates are getting put on the calendar and more of these plans are coming to light. So we know our good friends in Germany are doing, the Bundesliga are putting together their, events now with over 300 people that are going to be in the venue. They're going to see how that goes. We're going to learn a lot from that. We've been watching very closely what's happening in Asia as well. Taiwanese baseball and other events have actually continued. And we're looking at how the media space also changes to accommodate those fans that are outside of the venue, which is something we didn't even touch on here, but is a huge part of how you make fans that normally would be sitting in those seats feel like they're still there and can cheer and give the athletes the support that they so desperately want to hear. So that's a big boatload of words coming out of my mouth, but this graphic should help you guys get started in thinking about who you should be talking to and why. Julie and Ed are on the Slack community, so definitely do that. And one more thing I want to invite you all to do is join our hackathon. We are doing this in May. It's completely designed to get people to start innovating and thinking about some of these solutions. If you didn't think anything we said here made sense, come join, offer up some new ideas, and join with a team that can actually put these things together. We welcome all the small vendors to do that as well. The people that are going to put forward the best ideas will get to present those ideas to our leadership board, and Julie and Ed sit on that, and we'll have a bunch of people from the leagues and teams who also get to see these solutions and think about how viable they are for their organizations. So that's the Slack community, the Power Play Index, the hackathon, and on Thursday we do this all over again because the one piece we didn't talk about was the media experience. So we've asked Mihir to join us from LiveLike and Paul to join us from Scenic, who does watch parties and video streaming. You guys should tune in for that one. It's going to be another really important conversation because what the fans are doing outside of the venue is just as important as how quickly we can get them back in. Julie, Ed, I'm going to give you guys the ability to drop the mic. Any last words before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the punchline here is everyone on this phone call has a vested interest in getting folks back to the venue. So let's do it.
So a little bit of encouragement from Julie at Armored Things. Don't put on a Mets hat, but tell us what you think, Ed.
I would be putting on a Red Sox hat as well if I was doing it.
Oh, there you go.
No, I think what's going to help bring all this back is continued collaboration amongst everybody, right? There's no one has the answer. It's going to differ from leagues and cities. And so everybody staying in touch and trying to collaborate on this, because this is enterprise risk if we do this incorrectly, right? And so as a group, we all need to bring sports back in a safe, healthy manner. And it's, egos need to be all put to the side and everyone needs to work together to do that. And that would be, I strongly believe in all that. And I think as you talk to folks around the ecosystem, I feel like most people echo that as well.
Yeah, I mean, our good friend Tinas is on here, and he mentioned earlier that if we do this incorrectly, a false start could set us back. So we are committed to making sure that everybody in the industry has the best information they can to make these decisions going forward. You guys, thank you so much for joining. Gina, do you want to wrap up?
Thanks, guys. We went ahead and put some of the links to the content we just shared with you in the chat. So to access the hackathon, to join the Slack community, and to take a look at our Power Play Index, all on sportsilab.com, or check the links in the chat. So thank you, guys, and hope to see everyone back here on Thursday.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.